When I learned to map for Counter-Strike Source back in 2004, I was driven by excitement and curiosity because I loved playing the game and I wanted to make my own stuff for it. It took me years to learn, and it was all driven by experimentation and by the wild ideas that I wanted to try. This time around, my motivations for learning mapping are slightly different. I'm still curious to learn, but it's now about how it can enable me to make YouTube content. Because mapping for Source 1 helped me on hundreds of occasions when I was studying CSGO for videos that I was making. It allowed me to edit maps, to investigate them, and to understand why things behaved the way they did in Source 1. And it also let me make defenestration. But when it comes to learning Source 2, I'm in a position now that many of you are currently in, where you probably feel like you don't know anything about it, and the idea of having to learn a new tool for a new game engine feels like an overwhelming challenge. At least you don't have an audience of tens of thousands of people watching your every mistake. But everybody's got to start somewhere, so I proudly present to you the making of Nice Map 1. For this map, I plan to recreate my school. I want to make each room unique, complete with a model of the teachers and the students who dynamically walk about the school in the corridors following a routine that changes 5 days a week. I want a dynamic day-night cycle and weather, including a tiny chart of extreme weather events like tornadoes. But this presents a problem. These people must go home at night, so I will extend the map out to the surrounding areas, creating the whole town where I lived, complete with a model of my house, right down to the working computer setup inside that can be used to play Counter-Strike Source on. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. For my first map, I'm going to make and play on the most basic map that I can. And this is easier in Source 2 than it was in Source 1 because stuff no longer has to be sealed. You don't have to enclose everything into rooms, else risk leaks. Check this out. Empty map. Large slab on the floor. Player. Move him into the air a bit, otherwise he won't work. Yep, they still haven't fixed that. Add in some sunlight or the map will be black. Press F9, compile, and boom goes the dynamite. I've made my first map. I mean, it's rubbish. Doesn't deserve the name Nice Map 1. I call this Bad Map 1. But this will be one of the most important maps that I've ever made, because it's shown me that I can do it. I can load the editor up, I can place the basics in, and I can get myself playing on it, even if it's a bad map. 1. Making a map for Counter-Strike 2 feels slow. Everything about it feels fiddly because I have no experience or muscle memory with these tools. This is something that's way too easy for experts at something to forget. But there was a time when everybody had to think about each and every action they wanted to do, and things would take 5 times longer just because they were much slower at doing it, plus the delays when something doesn't work or because you made a mistake and can't figure out how to make it right again. I look back at the early maps of mine and they were so small and basic, and I think, why didn't I add more than one window to that house? And it's because that one window probably took me about 15 minutes to make. Working with a map editor like this will become more natural, but it just takes time. Too much time. But every time you do something, you'll get a bit faster and a bit better at it, and eventually you'll be one of those annoying people who makes everything look really easy. And you'll get insanely frustrated watching a new mapper spend 3 minutes carving out hills instead of using the displacement tool. So let's leave the map making alone for now, and experiment with some of the prefabs to see what the pros have already done with these tools. So Valve has kindly provided big boxy rooms with all the essentials needed for Counter-Strike 2's main game modes, which you can get and probably turn into your own map if you like. And this is becoming quite handy because in recent years Valve has added increased fluff to the game, like intro and outro animations to matches, and all this requires extra work from mappers to get it set up properly. Now, I haven't experimented with these things yet, but when I do care enough to learn about them, this is the sort of map I'll be loading up to do it on. But there's a much more interesting map if I go to the editor folder and load Tool Scene Lighting Dedust Day. Here we have a small section of dust too, full of what's needed to make it look good. And what's great about the Source 2 version of Hammer is that it looks a lot more like it will do in-game than mapping for CSGO ever did. Now, I will sound like a broken record at this point, but mapping for CSGO would not let you see what your map would look like when you were working on it. You had to guess what brightness and colour the lighting would be, and every time you wanted to see how it would look for real, you needed to render the map and load it up in-game to see it. This was a process that could take minutes or hours, depending on how big and complex your map was. It was common to have to do this dozens, if not hundreds of times over the course of a project. Occasionally you do this to play on your map, but most of the time it was just to check silly little things like how the lighting would look in certain spots and so on. A major aspect of mapping for CSGO was in finding ways to reduce the amount of time it took to render, depending on what it was that you actually needed to check it for. And it seems like Valve's goal with Source 2's Hammer editor is to minimise the number of renders required, down to the times when it's only needed if you want to play on it. And that's just as well, because rendering maps in Counter-Strike 2 takes forever. And Valve has managed this by moving all the mapping stuff over to the Hammer editor, so you only really need to render your map now if you want to play on it. This makes sense, it saves time, and we could have done with this about 20 years sooner. I have previously covered Hammer++, which was a third-party modification that added many useful features to CSGO's map editor. But for Counter-Strike 2, a lot of these features now come as standard. So we'll start with full bright view, which is similar to how your map would look in the Source 1 editor. I'm showing you this just so you can appreciate how useless this view is if you're trying to figure out how your map will look. Now I'll move on over to the better, much more useful view, known as direct lighting, which calculates the sun and all the lights in your level's first bounce. This is probably all you need most of the time. But say you need an even more precise view of how it will look in game. You can bake the lighting using this feature up here, which calculates the indirect lighting as well, being all the colours of the shadowy bits, and it makes the really shadowy bits super dark. But say you need even more. Well, now you can enable real-time ray tracing. RTX on and all that. Counter-Strike 2 doesn't support ray tracing, but the map editor for it does, which shows us a thing or two about Valve's priorities, because a lot of game developers shoehorn ray tracing into their games for players to use. But here, Valve has got it all working and then not allowed gamers to use it. Clearly, Valve deems real-time ray tracing to be a more important feature for mappers to use, because for them it's literally a quality of life improvement to be able to see how their map will look in real time. But for gamers, ray tracing is this thing that tends to slow their PCs down quite a lot, and in return they get subtle graphical improvements. So I agree with Valve's focus here, and I found myself messing about with this ray tracing for fun. For fun! I'm having fun with mapping! Said nobody in CSGO. Ever. But the new features don't just help with the lighting. Say you want to see how the Cubemaps will look in your level. It was always a fiddly process in CSGO. You had to render your map, load it up, build the Cubemaps, reload the level, and then turn on some rather limited tools to visually check how they looked. But in Source 2, you can bake Cubemaps up here, and as if by magic, you can transform your entire map into Terminator vision, before finally tuning the Cubemaps' positions and sizes to your heart's content. And this is just one of the 3D tools. There are many others allowing you to see all sorts, even super specific stuff, like at which point away from the camera, shadows will drop to a lower quality. I imagine a lot of these features won't see a lot of use, but they're here should you need them. Valve has put a few entities in these starter maps, and I presume they've done this because they deem them to be essential for any map to have in Counter-Strike 2. Let's take a look and see what they all do. So this ENV sky entity here is what decides what the sky looks like. If you delete it, then it turns black. This is much easier than it was in CSGO, because it means the sky is now the sky, and not some wall or ceiling with magical sky paint on it, like it was in CSGO, and CSS, and 1.6, and so on. You see this thing here? No, not the man, he's irrelevant. Be gone. But this ball here is two things in one. It is a cube map that you shaped the size of the room or area that it represents, but it's also a light probe. You know all those balls you saw in one of my previous videos? Yeah, this one creates balls in the same area as the cube map is set to. And it turns out that turning these balls on in the console in-game turns them on in the editor as well. There is so much about Source 2 that I don't understand just yet. Like why they made an entity that combines a cube map with these probe things. I guess it's just neater since they share some of the same properties. This sun is the sun, pointing in the direction you want the sunlight to go. That behaves the same as it does in CSGO, only it can now be updated and viewed in real time, which as I've already covered is much appreciated. And then you have this post-process volume entity, which I think seems a bit broken right now, but think of it as an Instagram filter for this particular area of the map. So if it's an outdoor area, then everything will get slightly warmer and glowier as you enter it, and so on. And that's it. The rest of the stuff you see in this level is what it is. This barrel is a barrel, this tyre is a tyre. But put it all together and it's a nice looking area of a map. Decorate enough places with the same level of detail and you'll end up with a map like Dust 2. It just takes time, as do these videos. And since I'm heading off to Cologne in a few hours, I'll end this video here, and when I return I'll make it into a map making series of some sort, maybe. Have fun!